Hello, my name is Patrick Graham, and I'm going to give a short presentation today, which is entitled, Why is Black History Important? So I'll just share the screen with you all. Bear with me a second. Okay, so presentation by Blackout Productions, presented by myself, Patrick Graham, entitled, Why is Black History Important? Or is Black History world history? Well, to me, Black history is, of course, world history, and it should be to everybody else too, because Black people are part of this world, so therefore it's world history. When we talk about the Romans and the Greeks, we might call it Greek history, Roman history, but we certainly don't use the term white history in front of it. So when we're talking about Southern Africa, Western Africa, East Africa, North Africa, Central Africa, or where Black people were in other parts of the world then and afterwards, why should we refer to it as Black history? For the purpose of this presentation, we will use the term Black history, and that's simply because over the years, the contributions to world history by Black people have been largely ignored, overlooked, and even appropriated, misrepresented, and basically lied about. So what is Black history and what is history? Well, as I stated, they are one and the same thing. So our focus today will just be a general overview as to why Black history is important. And for me, there's a number of reasons. Firstly, because a lot of Black people don't know their history. They don't know much about where they came from, what their heritage was. Even if they know their heritage is Africa, Africa can be referred to by some people as if it's a country. Africa is a continent made up of many, many countries and nations and tribes and different peoples who all have different cultures, hundreds and hundreds of different languages and different customs and different histories, which all contribute to the history of the world, just like Europeans do, just like Asians do, and so on. So Black history and history are one and the same. But as I said, for the purpose of this presentation, we will use the term Black history. So what do we know about early Black history? Well, some of the more famous places and names that, will pop up if someone, wants to recite one of the most glorious ages of Black history. They'll refer to the building, the scientific, the mathematical, the medicine side of ancient Egypt. So we have names like Kush, Nubia, Ethiopia, leading up to Egypt. But all these names are interlinked in some way because they all lie somewhere close to or around the Nile River, which gave rise to many great civilizations with its watering properties to make the land rich and lush, and the people who lived alongside it, in and around it. So what can we say about early European historians, or scholars rather? The likes of Solon, 7th century BC, Socrates, 5th century BC, Plato, also the 5th century BC, as is Herodotus, although they were all born a few years apart. Solon having been born basically almost 2 centuries earlier than them. But all 4 of them have something in common. All 4 of them had visited and spent much time in ancient Egypt, learning, mastering the arts of many different sciences and many different disciplines. And all 4 of them, bar Socrates, who didn't actually record and write things down. He gave oral testimonies and presentations, but the other 3 did record certain things. And they all mention Egypt in much high regard, to the extent of it being revered within the ancient Greek culture and customs, and a lot of things that went on in ancient Egypt were adopted and renamed by the Greeks. And a lot of the names we actually use to this day are actually Greek names when referring to certain parts of ancient Egypt. So Herodotus was a Greek historian, and he wrote in 450 BC that Ethiopians, a mighty race who surpass in comeliness and stature all peoples who are firm believers in God. Like, the importance of these type of statements, again, add to the importance of why Black history is important. And again, the reasons are people need to know their history and culture. Marcus Garvey said, a people without the knowledge of their history and roots, history and culture is like a tree without roots. And that's fairly self-explanatory. So all people need to know about all history, or as much as history as possible. Everyone can't know everything, but there's a lot, especially in today's world, 21st century, there's a lot of racist discrimination, which has gone on for, far too long now. And a lot of it is based on ignorance, arrogance in many parts, and a lack of knowledge of the history of Black contributions to world history. And then it's played down a lot. There's been many scholars over the years who claim Africa has no history, which, that's ridiculous, because the fact people live there, then of course it has a history. Lots of history and lots of things are recorded and written down, and lots of things are in oral history. But oral history is a tradition of every culture on this planet, whether it be Asians, Africans, Europeans, and so on. Everyone has an oral history, and all history began as oral history before writing was developed, and then eventually things were written down. The mere fact of something being written down does not on its own say that it must be true, or it has to, or it's more, there's more truth in that than someone who's telling an oral story. And to suggest that that's the case, I find such statements, ridiculous, to be honest, because there's many books which can be discredited because they have in them information which is written as facts, which are clearly not facts because they're wrong. Some of them are misleading through lack of knowledge, and some of them are blatant lies. So the importance of Black history is to redress the balance of these type of things. Again, Herodotus wrote also about Egypt this time. The art of medicine among them is distributed thus. Each physician is a physician of one disease and no more, and the whole country is full of physicians. For some profess themselves to be physicians of the eyes, others of the head, others of the teeth, others of the affections of the stomach, and others of more obscure ailments. So Egypt, as I mentioned before, some of the more famous of Greek scholars all studied and spent time there and learned great things from Egypt. And there's many more, who came after them and during the same time as them, and maybe and even before them, who also studied and held ancient Egypt in great reverence, as they did with Ethiopia. And all these same places are interlinked in some way. This is just a taster. Any of the things I mentioned today, or place names or people, it's up to the individual to go away and do some research themselves, look these things up, get books on them. The internet is a massive library. There's a lot of old books, especially when it comes to the ancients. All these books are free. There's no copyright law around them, so you can read a lot of the old writings and so on. So who were the ancient Egyptians? Well, there's the image on the left, as I look on it, is a statue that was discovered in the tomb of Tutankhamun in the 1920s. And it's of Tutankhamun, famous Egyptian pharaoh who lived, over 3,500 years ago. And that is a statue of him as a young boy. And the image on the right is a young African child, a young Black child. And as you can see, that is what that statue represents in real life. That's what he would look like, or very similar to this young child. So some people will argue the ancient Egyptians weren't Black. The people who built the Great Pyramids in Giza weren't Black. And they will even go as far as to say they don't actually know what color they are. Well, how can you say they're not Black then if you don't know what color they are? So that statement on its own is very dubious and open to question. However, the artifacts, the paintings, the statues, all depict Black people from ancient Egypt. So clearly, the people who built them were representing themselves. You wouldn't have another culture represent another culture and leave no image or trace of themselves. That just doesn't make sense, and is nowhere to be found in history. Also, you will find, if you have or if you choose to, any book, documentary, film, video that you will read about ancient Egypt always talks about that the people who built up Egypt, like there would have been people living there, but the main people, they migrated down the Nile and built that up. So, and all the the countries and inhabitants of down the Nile are all black countries. You know, Africa is a black continent, ultimately, especially back in antiquity. There's people who've moved there since, but ultimately it's still seen as a black continent made up of many different peoples. So again, here's another image of an ancient pharaoh. If I'm right, the image on the left is of Akhenaten, who is said to be the grandfather of Tutankhamun, the previous image, and again, a modern day East African who, you know, looks basically, you could say that was a statue of him. So clearly a black man. There's no one direct feature that black people possess. So the fact he may have thinner lips and a thinner nose, and some black people have broader lips and a broader nose, neither one can be argued as that what a black person looks like. A black person is what they are, and these representations clearly show that. Again, we've got the image on the far left is Queen Ty, and we've got images from tombs on the far right of ladies dressed in a certain attire. And we've got young girls, East African young girls, who, as you can clearly see, the styles and hairstyles and bands have not died out even after 2, 3, 4,000 years. It's still the same. These are one and the same people, or the descendants of these people. Artifacts that were found in various tombs, and as you can clearly see, the people represented just by the hairstyle alone is afro hair, braided hair in some cases, and clearly represent black people. Again, statues made and of the people who lived there at the time. Again, you know, more representations. You know, we could go on and say dozens, hundreds, but you know, the point is stressed that people want to go and look at these things up for themselves. It's quite easily seen to be done. You know, hairstyles that are still popular today. Some will argue that this image on the left is actually a crown or some type of hat, where there's others who will say, well, as you can see, that could well be a hairstyle. And in many cases, they are actual hairstyles and are wrongly identified as being crowns or hats of some description. Actually people's hair. Black hair is very versatile and can be styled in so many different ways, as this image that she clearly demonstrates. And again, a representation of someone with short cropped hair in a carving on a wall, and that's what it appears that it would definitely look like. This person now, world's first multi-genius, the title above him, is a man called Imhotep, who lived in the Third Dynasty Egypt, which is 2700 BC. So you're talking 4,700 years ago, basically, which is, you know, an incredibly long time. And why we call him the first multi-genius, because there's been many old papyrus where there's things that he had written, things that he'd studied, medicine, ailments, different treatments, and all sorts. He's also said to be the architect of King, because he was around at the time of King Zoser, who was a Third Dynasty Egyptian pharaoh, who requested this building be built, and Imhotep is said to be the architect of this. You know, what you can see, it's not just a pyramid, it's an incredible complex that's surrounded as well. And this is called the Step Pyramid, which is one of the earlier pyramids. You know, there was some before this time, and the pyramids were mastered later on in the Fourth Dynasty, where we have the pyramids, the 3 great pyramids of Giza. So just another angle and a closer look of the Step Pyramid in Saqqara. Okay, this building now is what we call the Church of St. George, which is in a place called Lalibela, which is northeastern Ethiopia, and it was built in the 12th century, and the area is named after a king who ruled at that time, Lalibela. And what is amazing about this church, and not just this church, is actually this is one of 11 churches that were built at the time. And what is amazing about this church is effectively a statue because it's carved down into the bedrock. You know, it's not built, it's not constructed with blocks and so forth and mortar. It's effectively a statue, it's a carving. And this other image is how it looks from the top. And as you can see, the solid rock surrounding it. And there's many churches which from a distance, you would not see them until you get close up and you met with these magnificent sites of what I say effectively statues or as they're known as monolithic structures. Again, just another angle of the church, and it is hollowed out inside, so people can actually enter the church. It's not just an outside and something to be observed. It's something that can actually be entered into. So fantastic achievement, and you know, all that rock that's being removed, it just begs the imagination as to how, you know, how they did that, you know what I mean? But clearly, you know, they had the technology and the skill to do it because this building still exists to this day and is, you know, a standard testimony to the great architectural and mathematical genius of the people of the time. This is a church which was built a lot later. The original church of Debre Berhan Selassie was actually built in the 17th century, and was rebuilt later on in the 19th century, around the 1880s, because it was destroyed during conflicts with other factions from the Sudan area, which is just, you know, borders Ethiopia. The image from the wall. That previous image was actually the ceiling of this, and you know, it's amazing. We've all, you know, not, I wouldn't say we, but many of us have all been in churches, especially those like I'm based in England, and any church I've been in, I've never seen an image on a wall of a black person with an afro, and it's just spectacular to look at, and this is all part of history, and it should be shown, and people should be learning about these type of things. Another one of the rock-hewn churches, the monolithic churches, again, you know, effectively, as I said before, the statue. This one's called the House of Mary. And as you can see, again, a more closer-up version. You might notice swastika-looking symbols on one of the windows here. If I can maybe just highlight that with my cursor, if you can see that. You know, so this symbol, you know, we know it is notoriously through history associated with Nazi Germany, but clearly is a symbol that's derived much earlier and even dates back a lot further than the 12th century. Again, another image of one of the rock-hewn churches. I'd say fantastical structures cut out of the bedrock and effectively on a statue. I have to keep repeating that because it's bewildering. The technology and the craftsmanship that would go into constructing something like that. Again, other images from the walls of Debre Berhan Selassie Church, which is in an area called Gondor in northern Ethiopia. This is what we know as an obelisk or a stele, and this is in Aksum, Ethiopia. And this particular one that we see here is 24 meters in height, which is almost 80 feet, like 78 feet and so many inches. And it's an amazing structure. Again, it's carved out of one solid piece of rock. It stands 24 meters high. And if you look closely, it almost looks like there's windows on it and a doorway at the bottom. You know, it could always be a representation of a skyscraper, or the skyscraper is actually a representation of this building built, you know, hundreds and hundreds of years later. Amazing structure, and as I say, that can be seen in Aksum in northern Ethiopia. The same stele, just from a different angle, and some smaller ones around it. But again, magnificent. The craftsmanship, the technology into producing these type of structures is quite baffling, to say the least. Beti Medhani Alem Church, again, Ethiopia in Lalibela. One of the monolithic churches, again, a statue. Ethiopia is said to be the first country to adopt Christianity as its national religion in the 4th century AD, although Christianity was practiced earlier than that, it adopted it as a national religion in the 4th century AD. And John Gunter, in his book Inside Africa, says about Axum, the site of some of the most stunning and mysterious objects of antiquity in the world, giant obelisks, or steles, as they rather be called, but as he says, giant obelisks made of single blocks of granite, larger than Egyptian obelisks, the origin of which is unknown. But that closing statement, I would have to confess, the origin of which is unknown is not actually true, because we know who built them. The Ethiopians built them. So to say the origin is unknown is a bit of a, again, a misrepresentation, and also downplaying the contributions of Black people to world history by saying, although the obelisk exists inside Ethiopia, which is a Black nation then and is now, that we don't know its origins as to who built it, which is ridiculous, because clearly they built it and it's within their history and traditions that they know they built it. This is a monastery in Gondor in Ethiopia. Again, this was built, I think, around the 15th century, but I may be wrong by a century or so, but I think it was around the 15th century this was built. And this is absolutely amazing. It would have been brilliant to see this structure still standing, because this would have been one of the biggest obelisks ever in the world. As you can see, you can just about see a figure of people to give it some perspective of its size and thickness. It would have weighed several hundred tons, and it's said that it was never actually erected, and it was just damaged and broken up during its construction. But again, to make something from one solid piece of rock is a remarkable achievement, and to attempt it, they clearly believed that they could do it, and maybe had done other similar ones, which the remains are yet to be discovered or recognized. Okay, so we've looked at a bit of North Africa with Egypt. We've looked at East Africa, looking at the likes of Ethiopia. So we're going to go over to the west of Africa now. And this is a man called Mansa Musa, who lived in the 14th century. Yeah, 14th century. Yeah, born in the 13th century. He lived and reigned as a king in the 14th century. And he reigned for over 25 years in the Mali Kingdom, which is West Africa, to modern day, around the regions of where modern day Ghana is now. The famous place called Timbuktu, he was the king of that area. And this is a 14th century Catalan map. And Catalan is an area of Spain, modern day Spain. And to have a Black king represented on an old map like that showed you his reverence. He was revered around Europe, and it is claimed and said to this day, 21st century, that this is, in comparison, wealth-wise, this is the richest person who has ever lived throughout all of known history. Mansa Musa, worth, as I say, worth a lot of money. The gold that and the gold mines that he was responsible for, and his country worked. Malcolm X, a lot of people have heard of Malcolm X, an American civil rights freedom fighter, who said, "Our history and our culture were completely destroyed when we were forcibly brought to America in chains. And now it's important for us to know that our history did not begin with slavery. We came from Africa, a great continent wherein live a proud and varied people, a land which is the new world and was the cradle of civilization. Our culture and our history are as old as man himself, and yet we know almost nothing about it." And that's an indictment of people in general. How come somewhere that is seen and recognized by many scholars today, although ignored by many as well, and not widely taught, even though it is recognized as being the cradle of civilization, for people to know very little about it, especially Black people, but all people, because it's important for people to have a global and worldly view, to be able to appreciate and understand each other and dispel the stereotypes and myths that manifests itself as what we know today as racism. So again, I've got a list of a few people who have achieved great things over in modern history in that respect. There's many people I could have named, but the purpose of this presentation is just to open up and discuss the importance of Black history, because There's so much there to explore, so much to investigate, and you can go back thousands and thousands of years in order to do this. Just a few people who I've just decided to highlight. People may want to look them up. People may want to look someone else up who they're aware of. But Walter Tull was a black footballer, and he was also an army officer, and one of the first officers who actually led troops during World War One. And for a black officer to lead troops, not just black troops, but white troops as well. This shows you this guy was an incredible guy and a great achiever, and also a footballer before the war and shortly afterwards. Elizabeth Bessie Coleman, she is said to be the first woman pilot, black woman pilot. And as you see, she had a fairly short life. And the next one, who's a similar background to Elizabeth Bessie Coleman, Eugene Bullard. Again, he was a pilot, an Air Force pilot during World War One. But unfortunately, with him being in America and the rules and discrimination that existed at the time, because segregation was still to be outlawed, and unfortunately, he didn't live long enough to see that, having passed away in 1961. Segregation was still the law of the land. He had to actually go to France, and he was allowed to fly there and fought in World War One. One of the few black pilots at the time who fought in World War One for the Allies, of course. And then we have Dr. Charles Drew. He was a very famous man because this guy saved so many lives, because he developed a way to store blood plasma for longer, so blood transfusions and so on could be given. And he died an untimely death himself, and may well have not be able to receive the life-saving treatment that he helped to develop. Dr. Sadie Mirror is a Somali archaeologist who has made many strides and discoveries. I think she's based in Sweden now, but she does a lot of. Her mission was to learn the history of Somalia and look at a lot of things. And she's surveyed over 100 sites in a time since she was born in 1977. She's quite young still. She's only she'll just be in her 40s, early 40s. Well, in 2007, she set out to do a great survey of Somalia, and she surveyed over 100 sites. One of the most famous of them sites is called, I'm not sure if I've got the pronunciation right, but the Dambalan rock art, which is said to be over 5,000 years old, in certain caves in the Dambalan area of Somalia. Then we have Dr. Patricia Bath, who she's famous for. If anyone's ever had a cataract removed, or the mother has, father, grandparents, well, she was famous for pioneering some of the surgery, or the surgery that led to these first development, removing cataracts from the eye. And lastly, just a few people I've picked. Creola Catherine Coleman, later to become Catherine Johnson, and I think she married again after that, and I think her surname was Global. But again, this woman was, everybody's heard of the moon landings, the Apollo missions. Well, she was one of the integral figures in the mathematics that determines the trajectory and flight paths and so forth, and a lot of things which is far above my head to discuss in great detail, but it's someone you could look up. There has been films made about her and other people who were involved in this, but these are just a handful of black achievers over the course of time. And I'll just close off the presentation, just some of the references of things I've read where I've got some of this information from. Different books, The Histories, Volume 2, Book 2, Herodotus on Egypt. Very interesting read and worthwhile. He not only discusses Egypt, he gives a physical description of the Egyptians, describing them as black and their histories. And, he talks about Ethiopia and the relationship between the two and all different things. Although we didn't mention too much about, although I didn't mention earlier, at this point I'll mention that someone is referred to as the Mad Queen of Madagascar, again by European scholars, but actually Rana Valona the third was a mighty queen of Madagascar, and during her reign and before that, conquest by the Europeans was held off while Europeans were running wild over Africa for many centuries before, enslaving people and conquering the lands and colonizing it, Madagascar was able to fight this off right up until the 1880s, 1890s, until eventually they just come to just relentless onslaught over hundreds of years of European nations since the first landings by the Portuguese in 1504 or around that time, right up to 300 years later, till they were eventually conquered and colonized by the French. And the last queen of Madagascar, Ranavalova III, was actually exiled and spent time in France and then Algeria, which was a French colony at the time in North Africa, and died there and was buried there. And it was after much protest and campaigning by the Madagascan people where the body was allowed to eventually be buried on a home soil. Prehistoric Egypt, some of the things I've mentioned have come from books I've read by William Michael Flinders Petrie, who some say is the father of Egyptian archaeology. He spent over 40 years or around 40 years studying Egypt, and he wrote maybe 40 books as well, or if not more. He picked in all different things and shown the links between the cultures stemming from what is Kush, Nubia, Sudan, Ethiopia to Egypt, demonstrating the links by the burial rites and practices to show that they were one and the same people and certainly related in many ways. So there's many other books, these are just a few of many books that I've read and many books that are available. And again, you can never read it all or see it all, but there's just some to choose from. But thank you for your time. I hope you enjoyed that short presentation, and I hope it gives you the impetus to go out there and use this as a catalyst to further your own research and knowledge. And I hope to see you again soon with another presentation looking at different aspects of world history, Black history. Thank you.